GPT models being accessible through the OpenAI interface is just a glorified API call. Why pay more when you can have everything running locally? Those models come with a trade-off of context length or in terms of connecting certain areas within the model. Instead of it being discrete, it is just quantized, which means the data points just have slightly lower fidelity, but so far we don't see a lot of the trade-offs impacting the outputs until you go to the 4-bit level. And a lot of the people in the industry are currently working on getting that working because once you get that, you are suddenly able to deploy large language models on your phone.
Welcome to AI Catch Up, the podcast catching up with the tech products that matter in the AI era.
Hi, Shahbaz, and welcome to AI Catch-Up Podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here, Lena. I'm glad to be able to discuss these topics in this forum. I really enjoy it because this is something that is emerging and everybody has anxieties about it. So I'm hoping that, through discussion, we can cut through some of those.
That is very, very true, Shahbaz. And to actually give our listeners a short intro on where you have been so far and what I call identities of yours are like. I know you as an ML engineer. I also know your effort in the education in artificial intelligence. You have also told me about different tinkering efforts that you are doing in your free time. And at the same time, I know your great progress when it comes to AI and art, which is very interesting direction. What other identity of yours should we know about?
Well, I kind of pick up anything that really intrigues me. I would say like an engineer would be the best definition because even right now, as we're talking, I'm considering building my own e-bike using off-the-shelf components here and to see if I can upskill the local labor here because we have a lot of it, like we have a lot of skilled people within India and especially in my town. And I'm wondering if I can bring the gains of EV to more people here because it's more affordable, it's better for the environment, it's just a lot of good things. So if I can do something to get that going, I would do that. I am also a video game developer. I have developed multiple game jam projects in the past, and I was a part of the San Jose State Game Development Club. I was the vice president of it for 1 year. I'm hands-on with building things with people and collaborating. I really love doing that. It energizes me into bringing about the change that I want to see in the world.
And would you say that your activity with art students in the University of San Jose is taking kind of 50-60% of your time, or how does it look like?
So right now the semester is off and I'm back home in India. Currently, I'm kind of weaned off of that. I'm still in contact with the faculty there to help them. But since I've had to return and there's new models that have come out, I'm pretty sure you've heard of the open source model, the text to video one. I don't remember the name of it exactly because I'm still looking into it and I'm trying to get that set up locally. And it's the one with the panda on a motorcycle. So there's an open source text to video model and the comfy UI workflow of that just came out. And I'm trying to see if I can get that set up on school computers so that art students can use it if they wish to do so. Fine-tuning that and using that with Dream Booth and stuff is, of course, an ongoing development. Let's see how that turns out or if it goes forward.
I think I know what you refer to.
Yes, give me a second. It is on my Discord. So yeah, here it is. Hunyan. It's like Hunyuan. I don't know how to pronounce it properly, but it's that model.
That is very interesting. And generally speaking, you are a great source of insights when it comes to local training and local inference to me. Maybe you could describe how you started with local models. And I think that you have started with GANs, didn't you?
Yes. So I've always had this approach since I was a kid. I'm very old school. Since the 2000s, we didn't have good internet in India, right? I had to be resourceful and make do with what I have. And that would lead to a big bias towards having everything locally on your machine. If you want to watch a movie or something, you back it up and then you put it on your PSP or all those things. The internet was just not involved. There were no service providers per se. But it comes with some form of freedom associated with it because once you have that on your machine, you kind of own it in a way, right? Of course, you're not licensed and all of that stuff, except for the legal jargon of it. You're free to do with it what you want to do when it comes to how you use it. Because of that, I initially got into learning OS scripts, being intrigued. I've tweaked Grand Theft Auto Vice City files to mess with the physics in the game. And I was doing that in my mid-teens, I think. Looking at that and then looking at immediately when the generative AI models came out and OpenAI was on the scene, it became very interesting to see if I could get all of that. If you think about it, GPT models being accessible through the OpenAI interface is just a glorified API call. And in order for students to have access to it, in order for everybody to be able to do it, they need to pay a middleman, which is, of course, OpenAI, who possesses the model. So they built it and they charge for that business model. I didn't want that to get in the way of students actually getting equipped with the skills that they need. A lot of the time you have to discuss with university staff, and there needs to be enterprise level deals that need to be done. In order to just bypass that, I was like, okay, somebody released this open source. Why go through all of that and pay more when you can just have everything running locally and you can have it accessible whenever you want? There's been instances where some services have had to go down because there's some server issues or anything like that. Maybe there's too many people using it. God knows what happens, right? Sometimes they just go down. It just bypasses all of those problems. The only you need to be worried about is GPU costs, because you do need a good GPU in order to be able to running a lot of these things locally on your machine.
That is one of the very big concerns when it comes to the future of AI and our dependence on GPUs and the fact of them being more available in the countries with higher income, and then automatically bringing us to the point where we are indeed very much in need for certain strong capital investment. But if we would leave that out of equation, what are other trade-offs? Because those models are within the definition smaller, right? So not exactly the size of GPT-4 or comparable ones. What other things do you observe? Is it that you are then fine-tuning them to be matching the goals that students have, or how do you deal with the number of parameters that you can indeed fit into the resources that you're having?
So a couple of things about that. First of all, I will say they are smaller, but not in the sense that they lack something. They are only smaller in the sense that they are quantized. And that is thanks to Titus and his team. They're from Germany. They work for Bits and Bytes. I've been fortunate enough to meet them at a conference last year. Those models are just quantized and they come with a trade-off of context length or in terms of connecting certain areas within the model. Instead of it being discrete, it is just quantized, which means the data points have slightly lower fidelity, but so far we don't see a lot of the trade-offs impacting the outputs until you go to the 4-bit level. And a lot of the people in the industry are currently working on getting that working, because once you get that, you are suddenly able to deploy large language models on your phone. There's been developments at ARM that are ongoing that are trying to do this, and a bunch of other companies are trying to hop onto that and get that going. Another thing I would say about this is they might be smaller models, but for practical uses, that's all you need. Most of the time, I'm running LM Studio on my machine. And how I like to see it is kind of unconventional. I like to see it not as a large language model or as a chatbot. I like to see it as the internet in my pocket. I can go anywhere, have access to all the information up until a certain year, date, and time at my fingertips. I just need to load up LM Studio, type in my question, and voila, you have it. Being connected to a service provider is redundant for me in that aspect because I need the internet to access the internet. So I already have the internet, but I'm just making it more convenient. What I'm saying is, no, what we have is much greater than what we realize. We literally have the entirety of the internet in our pockets. So it has some really big gains that we can capitalize on in terms of resources. Some schools may not be able to afford paying these models. A lot of the schools, like smaller schools or non-chain schools, they can't afford this. So it's a bit harder for them to get there. Even if it is made affordable, there is concerns about where your data is going and how is it being used. Not everybody has those concerns, which is great and fine, but it does get in the way sometimes. So having an alternative where you can run stuff locally and control everything and not be worried about these is just so good, because you finally get to cut through the red tape and actually get the technology connected with the people who need it.
Yeah. I really like your definition of freedom, the freedom from providers. That is
Yeah.
very interesting. At the same time, what I also very often hear from people that are referring to active usage of small models, or the ones that at least fit into our local setup and our, as you say, pockets. I don't know whether I will fit the GPU into my pocket, but maybe I need bigger pockets. At the same time, my question is more on the side of context size and context length. So we
Yeah.
currently observe that O1, O3, and DeepSeek models, they are solving the task at hand using the context length in a way. So they are thinking, they are reviewing different paths that the model can take, and then sort of propagating the next answer and the potential method of solving the task at hand. And with small models, since they are small, meaning not only the number of parameters, but also having the context length that is shorter, what do you think is the way how small models can achieve, well, it is difficult to define, but probably higher level of intelligence?
So I don't think that we should be aiming for that because you have a tool for everything, right? You have a specific tool for a specific task. It's a lot more convenient to do that. It's a lot more easier and it's more rewarding. You could have a butcher knife. You could use that to cut vegetables or potatoes, but it would be overblown. Similarly, for smaller models, I think currently the only problem with getting LLMs to the 4-bit quantization is that it comes at a noticeable drop in performance when they perform evaluations on those, right? 8-bit, not so much. It's still working fine. And 8 bits is really workable. I use Llama 3.1, and I think it's like 5 GB on my disk. And it's working just fine. It serves all the purposes that I want it to serve. But for your phones and all of those things, that's what the industry is trying to work out. If we put these things on our phones, what benefit are we getting from it? And they want to improve on that. They want to make it better. And as you mentioned, looking at all the probabilities, that's how all of the AI is working. But what I'm seeing is an implementation of the agentic workflows, which prompt narrative or path works out best for getting us to the answer that we desire. Kind of like an internet search, but it's more interactive. You get to talk to the internet and like pick its brain. It's like, hey, could you tell me more about this or that or this or that, which is more in line with the natural way of us parsing for information. For example, you're asking me questions right now. You'd ask me multiple questions leading to the exact thing that you want me to share with you.
So when it comes to the practical ways how you are using your quantized models that are running locally for you, you're mostly seeing it as a search task. Do you think that there is something else what our listeners can use small models for?
Yes, I wouldn't suggest mathematical stuff right now because the way these models are designed, they're not well equipped to handle those tasks. Everybody's working on those. But other than that, I think it's a great tool with a bit of media literacy and skepticism. Of course, don't believe everything you see on the internet. This applies to AI models currently as well. You know, they have a tendency to hallucinate. But even with the hallucinations, you'll be surprised at how much of the information is accurate. And how I do it is like I prompt it again to verify. Like, can you verify this information is true or false? To even shorten that chance even more so and catch a hallucination that is going on. I use it for helping drafting letters. I use it as an editor companion when I'm writing large form stuff. I use it as a coding assistant. And that's all just Meta 3.1. You know, that's a model that's been trained to be sort of general purpose. It's not a domain specific model like GitHub's Copilot or StarCoder. So most of the time, it's just been amazing. One of the biggest gains that it's given to me as a developer is that I no longer have to consult API documents for everything. That used to be, even though I'm an avid reader, that used to be a nightmare because I'm like, these two things are similarly named. Which one do you want me to go to? Or this has been deprecated. Why hasn't this been updated? Which is an ongoing issue with some cloud providers, you know? Um, and I don't like blame them. It's a daunting task to keep on updating and then also updating the documentation to reflect that. But LLMs, because they also parse forum data, maybe Stack Overflow or similar sites, they are able to better keep pace with these developments than other places, sometimes even official domains. It is amazing to have that at your disposal at any given time.
I hope that we will just stop updating documentation once we all start searching with,
Yeah.
with certain language models. At the same time, what was also the challenge for me when it comes to using quantized models was actually multimodality. Because generally speaking, if we have the image that is being passed in the prompt, then it is adding a lot into context size, right?
Yep.
And the models that I see performing well in the size of under 8 gigabytes, they are mostly text-based. They are not having any image in them. And I'm not talking about videos at all. What is your take on multimodality? Will it be in any way handled by the local models?
It's a problem that they're working on already without explicitly working for it. The context length sizes are the biggest factor for that. If you need to squeeze in more information for your model, you better know, how much of data you're working with, what you want out of it. I've seen some really, really beautiful developments on this front. I started looking at it with GPT-4. And I remember there was a time when there was this weird spot where people were realizing, like, oh, wait, yo, ChatGPT supports images. And like, it's also insane how we're talking about this as if this was 8 years ago. But no, this was literally
Yeah.
last year or like 2 years ago, where people would encode the image into a different format, maybe like get the pixel raw data values, like RGB values for the picture, and then push it to GPT, and it would be able to pick it up. So people were like, what is going on here? How is it able to understand that? So when you look at that older way of communicating, right? These models are trained that way, and even the latent diffusion models work that way, where they have to basically deconstruct the image, get it in data format, and then teach the model the data relations. So when they're doing that, the more data you want in there, the higher resolution data you want in there, you're going to need more context length. And the text is a fundamental domain. Everything is built on that. StyleGAN is a very different model, but for example, latent diffusion models, right? The ones that I've been using to help art students get equipped with emerging tools within a generative AI workflow. They have two models under them. One is a text model, and the other is the latent diffusion model, right? And the latent diffusion model itself is inspired by older models like generative adversarial network and the variational autoencoders. So those have fed into what that device is, and then the other device is the NLP component of it. Without this, you can only get so much out of this. You first need a good model to be able to do that, and I think that's what everybody's trying to achieve. So to answer your question specifically about what I think about multimodality, videos I think might take a while because that is a lot of data. You need a lot of compute to be able to do that. You need a lot of GPUs to do that. The moment you start increasing the context length, you suddenly start needing more and more computing power for the model.
So we now have the combination of approaches, and what is staying missed is actually how much of the past we are using currently. That not everything is indeed GPT based, and that we are also doing interesting things with different types of resources that we are having. So how are we using CPUs? How are we using GPUs in the place where, well, the resources are limited? What would you say about how exactly this can be approached by our listeners?
There's definitely a industry move towards getting more stuff running on CPUs because most ultrabooks, most computers that you use don't have a GPU that is powerful enough to do a lot of these tasks currently. That's of course going to change in the future, but everything is sort of tied to an Intel or an AMD chip, which is the x86, right? And that can perform only so many computations per second. The clocks can only go so fast. GPUs are very, very valuable because of how transformers work. They take a sentence, they break it down into its fundamental subwords, and then blast it off, and then tell the computer to form statistical relations with them, and then get the answer for it. It is the parallel computing capabilities along with proprietary software that keeps these things so efficient and so fast on GPUs versus CPUs. With that being said, I do think we are going to be in such a good position soon because everybody is trying to address this problem. Literally everyone. People who are not even on the hardware side are also looking into it because they simply want more diversity of options. What we're seeing is hardware chips are coming out, which are like The numbers are off the charts, but they're doing that by running inference only. They're not made for fine-tuning tasks, and they're just being rolled out. And I think we're going to see more of that within this year and the next, where you have chips that are optimized only for inference and not for training. So there's decoupling within GPUs, which is an interesting development. I never would have imagined it. There might be specifically good GPUs for training, and there might be specifically good GPUs for running all of this software.
A very interesting idea that would probably also support your prediction on us using more inference-oriented GPUs was the idea that if we are using LLMs as they are currently, then we are setting a certain threshold of how long the model can think. And if we are saying that, well, the time that you are spending on different questions can be different, then we are also able to kind of address the long tail of questions. And then exactly this inference-oriented GPUs would be very handy.
Yep.
Now that we have started talking about more applicable things, what I'm also very curious about is AI adoption. Because from the technical perspective, yes, we can tweak, we can change, we can re-engineer things. But you have been talking to art students in the times when the wave of ChatGPT has started. So what I would be very particularly interested in was, what have you been saying to those ones that felt like, oh, all the interesting creations that I'm having in my mind would or might be outperformed by something that is not even having any human element once it is being executed. Where exactly the artificial intelligence place is in art?
Okay, that is a very controversial question to answer, right? Because I am very much also worried about what a lot of artists are worried about. You know, they don't just associate the advent of AI with a lack of creativity, they're worried about the displacement of labor. You would imagine that automating all of this would kill creativity or kill an interest within the arts, which is not true for me personally, which is, of course, anecdotal, but it has drawn me closer to it. I see stuff and I want to engage with it. I want more of it. I want to perfect it. I want to tweak it into what I desire, what's in my mind's eye. It is not shirking me away from it. It is only bringing me even more into it. Another thing is the anxiety regarding how it'll kill creativity. I like to go back and point towards how we've always had these discussions whenever new forms of media have come out. I like to point to specifically photographs. What are they? Think about when photo just came to be and it was becoming an art form of its own in the 20th century. People had all sorts of criticisms back then too, valid ones. They were like, okay, now illustrators are going to be out of a job. We're not going to have paintings anymore, but they're not gone anywhere. I worked with one of my professors, James. He mentions this quite a bit too. He's like, yeah, painting, famously dead, right? It's so absurd to think that whoever is driven to do those things will still do them. They'll still find it rewarding. They will keep on doing it. They don't do it for the money to begin with, even though I think they should get all the money that they can get to live a comfortable life. That's not the issue here. The issue is the displacement of labor. To tackle that is how I worked with art students. Instead of having an adversarial relation to new developments in technology, they can, or like when I say they, I mean I myself, if I want to do all these things, we would have to look at this and see it as an opportunity as well. Just because this tool set's coming out and it is hidden behind this weird programming interface, doesn't mean that you cannot benefit from it. Everything is going to be rolled out. There's going to be graphical user interfaces, which is how I taught the use of these tools to some of the students. Automatic 1111 is an open source project. It works with Stable Diffusion, is compatible with a few other models as well. That is all it is a graphical user interface. So it's intuitive enough in its design that a normal person who wants to learn or equip themselves with these skills is able to interact with it and get what they want out of it. Instead of being adversarial to it, you equip yourself with those skills, as is fundamentally true for all AI models right now at this given point of time. When you need an expert on top of these things to manage the outputs and get what you want professionally, instead of being against that, why don't you become the expert? you're going to be a better expert than, of course, I will be because you've practiced art for so many years. And another thing is, why do we create technology? We create technology to make people's lives easier, more convenient, right? Artists have to animate keyframe by keyframe. It's very hard. They have to draw a lot of stuff. Animation is just a nightmare. The famous saying on my campus was, I've seen a lot of majors, man, but like engineering majors and all of these things, but the animation majors are just on a whole other level of stress because of the work that they have to do. It's just you had a really good animation program, but that's what the cost is. There's just way too much to do at a given point of time. So I see that these models can help with some of that. Of course, especially in the current state, they're going to put out junk sometimes, or in fact, a lot of the times, and you have to sit and fix that. But thinking about it in a way that, hey, I want some concepts generated for this. Maybe I don't want the actual thing right now. I just want to get a visual idea of how that would look like. It's perfect for that. You don't really care about the flaws of it when you're just trying to visualize something or be creative.
Yeah, I see your point. I would also highlight such experts in the fields where we are probably not feeling that we are experts to anyhow prescribe what is the way of artificial intelligence to operate. Should it be in the space of animation? Should it be in the space of people that are editing audios? They should pretty much choose the small element of the speech wave and then work on the small element which is not zoomable in. And then you should also operate in frequencies, and then you should choose the frequency out of nowhere. Is it the aspect that is really, really that interesting to people that are doing that? Or what I have also heard from people that are editing videos on the regular basis, how they have always struggled with the resources that are necessary. All the editing software is actually very expensive. At the same time, when I'm thinking about us expressing ourselves or how we perceive the world, there is a big elephant in the room that should definitely be discussed, and something that will remain, unfortunately, unsolved also after our conversation, and that is namely bias. In many ways, art is exaggerating something that is necessary to be exaggerating according to the point of view of the artist. And if it is the bias that we observe in recruiting or considering someone for certain imprisonment, that is one type of bias. But then if we are thinking about the bias that is present in the painting or that is present in a certain sculpture, that is something different. Would you say that AI is indeed reducing the bias in the situations? Does it increase it?
It has a tendency so far of increasing it. That's one of the biggest worries that we have with AI models. As experts within this domain, we look at how these things are trained, and nobody's out there intentionally trying to do that. It is more of a lack of care given to these problems that causes them. The most famous example, of course, is questioning the model of, okay, king minus man, and it's queen or something, right? But when they do that for, let's say, a doctor, suddenly you ask it the same question and it says nurse, which is biased. It is sort of messed up if you think about it. The reasoning behind it being historically women were kept from that profession. So there's a historical bias towards it, which is being amplified further through our models. I've tried to address this in a different way. We need to sanitize these data sets and take proper care there. Even as I speak, I'm in India. We have 31 languages or more here. There's a lot of languages within this country. I don't have a model per se that speaks my language. I know ChatGPT has come out with some really, really good and beautiful products to that, and I'm appreciative of that. It is still, though, mostly either people don't know, which will change with time, but also the costs associated with it may or may not be affordable to most people living in this country. Most languages are not going through the treatment that my language was able to go through. Punjabi specifically is somewhat supported on ChatGPT now. That's not true for Braj Bhasha. Sanskrit is just a whole different talk altogether. It's kind of like talking about Latin. That's one of the things that we need to address because it also hasn't been digitized. Our languages, our records were not digitized for the longest time. So that just doesn't exist within that format. So it is, of course, going to lead to bias. When you don't have narratives, when you don't have data about 10% of the world population living here, of course it's going to lead to problems. And especially when you try to expand and bring more people into the fold. At least we know that we're trying to solve those problems, right? When it comes to AI and art, that is one place where I am trying to tackle bias. It is both intentional bias, but also unintentional, just because of material realities. An example of this is Sikhi came to be in this proper form around the end of 1700s. That's when we started wearing turbans, having our hair grown out, and having this visual way of expressing this identity. That is absent because it didn't exist. That's absent in a lot of artworks from the Renaissance era, because when that was happening, we were just building. There will be people with turbans, there will be people with beards, but because they were not geographically in the same space a lot of the time, and also because most of the artworks being made at that time were being made for nobility, rich merchants, or on the patronage of all of really financially well-off people. We don't have those depictions. I am trying to tackle that by using the gains of AI, and I call it vulgarizing it. And the reason I use that word is vulgarizing in its true sense means to make common. In a time when we are living in democracies, when we don't really have monarchs ruling the roost in most of our countries, why doesn't that change reflect in our artworks? It is still financially very expensive to get all of these. And I feel everybody should have the ability to be able to see themselves in a certain way depicted in artwork. It's something fundamental to human beings. From cave paintings, we can see that. And everybody is a king. They get to vote. They get to be decision makers about their lives. Of course, how much agency they have, that's what democracy is. We negotiate that. But how I try to do it is I take AI technology and depict people who have been historically marginalized or not represented within certain art forms, and I depict them in that way with dignity and humility and the majesty and grandeur associated with that. Photographs are another way we could say that you could do that, but photographs are showing you what is real. They don't stylize. That is something that has always been elusive to us for the longest time. We have filters and stuff, but they can only do so much. It is with AI technology that we're finally able to get somewhere with that depiction.
So what I should right now highlight is the fact of us using art for such a long time only in the form of entertainment and not at all as the form of depicting the reality. And when it comes to photography, indeed, it is the form of reality that is captured in a certain way. And if I'm thinking about new generations that are seeing something visually, and we have 80 or 90% of our perception happening through our eyes, right? So everything that is being seen is definitely inputting us. And then if we are thinking about how to reflect reality in a wider way, or at least with the higher range of options that are available, that would probably benefit a lot.
Yep.
I know that you're having rather deep concerns when it comes to publicly sharing things. That is why I'm aware that you are not posting in a way that it will be everywhere and please everyone look into this, because you're afraid of this being used for also evil purposes. So how then you are actually sharing what bringing the amplified bias to the eyes of viewers is like?
How I usually have been sharing these developments, as I've been converting a lot of this stuff into physical format media. I don't share the digital because it is immediately and easily reproducible, copied, shared. All of those things, a whole can of worms opens up. So unless it's specifically the person that I'm talking to, right, and I have their consent for specific things that I want to use their generated artworks for, I share it in terms of physical media. You might say, hey, that's going backwards, man. We are now in the digital age and you're trying to go back. But there's something that is associated with it. Once I go from digital to analog, first of all, that is an interesting development in itself. Usually it's the other way. But then on top of that, once it's in physical format, I get to control where this is going, who this is being shared with, how is it accessible, if it is accessible at all. So most of the time, what I've done is whoever I've done this project for, I've generated works with them, worked with them closely, and then asked them, what light would you like to be depicted in? And whenever they express a desire to be shown in a certain way, depicted in a certain way. I try to get that going. Then I go back to them. Okay, we have 1,000 images. So do you want to sit through them, or do you want me to send you the curated list that I think is legible and good, or so on and so forth? Then they choose whatever they want, and then I share the digital with them. And if I'm able to and or want to, or if they express the desire for that, I show it to them or give it to them in a physical format. My choice of format has been Polaroid film so far, because it is just such a perfect medium for this. I've been working with that medium for a bit. I've been trying to do emulsion lifts, which is you just lift the paint layer of the Polaroid picture and put it on some other medium, like fine art paper. And suddenly you have this wavy floating image on top of actual fine art paper. And then you have to question yourself, is this art or not? I like to make that question possible. And I truly enjoy doing that. There's other formats too, by the way. Polaroid film is just amazing for this sort of stuff. But I don't want to come off as I'm just advertising them. So I'll stop here.
But that would be indeed the great question closing our conversation today. And let listeners think what art is and what it is not. If someone wants to continue the conversation with you, what will be the best way to contact? Will it be a certain email? Will it be LinkedIn?
Well, I would say email would be the preferred medium if you want to talk to me. If you want to connect with me, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Alina, I'm of course going to give you the links for my LinkedIn ID, but my Gmail is also, it's a mouthful. It's shahbazmansahia@gmail.com. I'm really open to this. If you're just, dude, I'm having trouble setting up a comfy UI on my system, I will try to help you as best as I can. I truly will. And I enjoy doing that, because I want to bring more people and make this more inclusive of a space.
Sounds amazing, Shahbaz. Thanks a lot for your time today.
Thank you for your time and for having me, Alina.
AI catch up brings the news. Tech solutions users can't refuse.